what it's done to people's sense of their own dietary requirements, and even the idea that if you're enjoying a meal that you could absorb more iron, I think was one example that you had. Could you speak to us a little bit about, that important area of our relationship to food and nutrition, and how your kind of research has shed some light on it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of research now showing that, in very much the same way that our expectations of medicine or our expectations of exercise can shape our physiology, so can our expectations of food. I mean, the truth is that in our guts do have kind of sensors that can give us a very rough idea of kind of what we've eaten, and they can sense certain nutrients. But that data is really ambiguous. So we know that when we have ambiguous data, our expectations come into play in creating the brain simulations that are helping it to kind of understand that data. So very much our kind of memories of what we've eaten and our perceptions of what we've eaten, whether we expect it to be satisfying and filling or, low fat and, with barely any calories. But that is then changing our interpretation of these signals that are coming from the gut. And that in turn is going to shape things like appetite and even the hormonal response to the food. So in one of my favourite studies, researchers called participants into the lab on 2 separate occasions. They had exactly the same milkshake on each occasion, but they were labelled very differently. So in one time it was labelled as this kind of sensible health shake with 140 calories. All of the words that were used to describe it were focusing on what it lacked, and it was, just a very bland description, as you often get with health foods. The other one labelled it as this kind of delicious, decadent, luxurious treat. It was like 700 calories, it was it just painted it as something that was going to be a lot more satisfying. And so at the same time, the researchers took blood samples, before, during and after the experience of the milkshake to try to see what the hormonal response was. And they focused particularly on ghrelin, which is called the hunger hormone. Now, this stimulates appetite. So often you might see a spike just before you're eating because your body's getting ready to be satisfied, and then it drops dramatically because it knows it's eaten enough. It doesn't need to seek out food, so your appetite drops along with the levels of ghrelin. Now, that's exactly what happened when people ate the luxurious, decadent milkshake, the one that was labelled in these terms. The body responded as if it had had a good, satisfying meal. Now, when they had the health shake, there was barely any change in ghrelin. It was just kind of flatlining. It was almost as if they just hadn't really eaten at all. So their expectation of what that food was containing then changed the body's response. Now, we have lots of other examples. You mentioned the absorption of nutrients depends on our enjoyment of a meal. We also know how quickly a food passes, through the digestive system can be shaped by our expectations. If we don't really feel like we've eaten much and that it wasn't of value, it just goes through the body much more quickly than if we feel that we've eaten something that was satisfying, full of nutrients that we need to digest and process more carefully. So, yeah, our expectations are hugely important for what we're eating, and I think it's incredibly important for dieters that you don't just eat those kind of really bland foods that might have fewer calories, because you're actually going to set yourself up with those expectations of deprivation to feel hunger pangs later on. You do much better to have a food maybe with a few more calories than the diet foods, but one that you really enjoy, that's really interesting and feels like a celebration, that's actually going to keep you more satisfied for longer and stop you snacking later on in the day.